Long Beach that covers queer news in the greater Los Angeles region, Southern California, and beyond. In fact, Q Voice News is the only digital-first LGBTQ news outlet in the entire Los Angeles region. We're pretty proud of that. I want to thank Jules and Hamburger Mary's for letting us host our second event about Long Beach's unknown queer history here. We appreciate their support. But this event isn't the first time that Q Voice News has worked with Hamburger Mary's. Last year, we hosted our first event exploring Long Beach's unknown queer history. It was fabulous. It was very exciting. In fact, one of the people we focused on and spoke with last year, Carolyn Weathers, is here today. Also, Jules, who hosts the fabulous drag shows and brunches here at Hamburger Mary's, and Q Voice News collaborate on a video series called Queer History Lessons with Jules. Jules is the host, and these videos last between 3 to 4 minutes and explore a person, place, or date in our history. Topics range from politics, civil rights, entertainment, and sports. For example, some of the videos we've made have been about Carolyn Weathers, a Long Beach resident who led an uprising that helped get homosexuality removed as a mental illness in 1973. We also did a video on Lee Glaze, a Long Beach resident who led a protest against police abuse at his Wilmington bar, The Patch, in 1967. That protest took place almost 2 years before the Stonewall Uprising in New York in 1969, which means that Long Beach is on the queer history map before New York City. That's pretty exciting. We've made approximately 25 videos. All of them are fascinating and fabulous, and you can find them on qvoicenews.com or on our YouTube channel, Q Voice News. In fact, we made a queer history lesson with Jules about today's topic of the Long Beach police entrapping gay men. Let's watch that video.
Hey everybody, it's Jules Long Beach, and today's queer history lesson is about the Long Beach Police Department's long pattern of discriminating against and arresting gay men. Long Beach has a reputation today as a gay-friendly city, but this police practice of discrimination against gay men and lewd conduct sting operations dates to 1914. These are the controversial arrests you've heard about, where an undercover decoy officer goes into a public restroom, starts flirting and cruising with an unsuspecting man. When the man exposes himself to the decoy, the cop says he's offended and arrests the guy. A play was even written about this dark chapter in Long Beach history called The 20th Century Way. Many lives were ruined from these arrests and prosecution. In later years, city prosecutors would charge the man arrested with indecent exposure. Under California law, if you're found guilty of indecent exposure, your name is listed on the state's sex offender registration list, and for more than 50 years, lawyers and LGBTQ advocates in Long Beach had asked judges to throw out these arrests, but they would not. All of that changed in 2016, and the historic case People versus Maroney. This case was groundbreaking because it was the first time in Long Beach court history that a judge had dismissed one of these lewd conduct sting cases during a preliminary hearing. But the judge didn't just throw out the case. In his ruling, the judge had blistering comments for the Long Beach Police Department and the city prosecutor. The judge said the only way he could justify the police tactics and prosecute the case was, quote, in the rhetoric of homophobia that seeks to portray homosexual men as sexual deviants and pedophiles, end quote. After the ruling, no one from the prosecutor's office, the police department, the city council, or even the city of Long Beach ever apologized for how those gay men had been persecuted since 1914. And this just happened the other day, in 2016. I hope you've learned something today in our queer history lessons. What do you think about that decision or the long history of discrimination in the great city of Long Beach? For Q Voice News, this is Jules Long Beach. You can find me across the internet at Jules Long Beach. I hope you'll tune in and watch even more queer history lessons as we explore our great history.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, so here's our panel for today. Jerry Shipsky is passionate about the history of her hometown, Long Beach. Her latest book is The Long Beach Gay Trials, A History of Injustice. It explores how and why Long Beach started entrapping gay men in 1914. Jerry was the first lesbian to be elected to public office in Long Beach. She served 2 terms on city council after being elected in 2006. Jerry and her spouse, Roy Pickett, have been together since 1980, raising 3 children and a granddaughter and schooling their dog English. Roy Maroney was the defendant in the historic 2016 case, People v. Maroney. He was arrested and charged with lewd conduct, but the case was thrown out during a preliminary hearing. He is a lifelong resident of Long Beach and was a grand marshal in the 2017 Long Beach Pride Parade. Also, his story was partly his story that the movie Plain Clothes, which is out now, is based upon. The director interviewed him extensively to find out how undercover police officers were entrapping gay men in restrooms. Stephanie Lofton has been an attorney since 1990 and is the founder of Long Law. She handles criminal defense cases, and for more than 20 years defended gay men who had been arrested by the Long Beach Police Department's undercover decoys in lewd conduct sting operations. She was co-counsel in the historic 2016 case, People v. Maroney. She has received numerous awards for her work as an attorney and defending the LGBTQ community. Also, she was a member of the Long Beach Police Chief's Gay and Lesbian Advisory Group from 1991 to 2005. Halim Dhanidina started his legal career as a deputy district attorney in the LA DA's office in 1998. In 2012, he changed careers and became a judge in the Los Angeles Superior Court. He was the first Muslim Superior Court judge appointed in California. In 2018, he was appointed to the 2nd District Court of Appeal. He retired from the bench in 2021. He works as a neutral at Signature Resolution, a mediation company. Halim has also received numerous awards for his legal work. Please welcome our amazing panelists. So the video gave us background and context about this topic and the case. I was in court, just for some transparency, for a couple of days for the preliminary hearing. And I remember watching Halim's reaction as the judge, especially during testimony from an expert witness who was talking about cruising culture and how this happened in restrooms and what precautions gay men took and what they would go through. And having seen a bunch of these cases before, most of them judged were homophobic, would not dismiss them, would not side with defendants. I went in very skeptical because it kind of was like, when you've been beaten up so many times, you're like, here it goes again, here it goes again. But I remember, and I told Halim this earlier, I remember watching that day of testimony and talking about cruising culture. I thought, okay, this is going to win or it's going to break. He's either going to roll his eyes and be like, what the hell is this nonsense? Or he's going to listen like a judge should. He was completely engaged. He was listening, he was making notes, he was asking questions, and it wasn't the sort of questions that were condescending or homophobic. They were engaging questions, and he was really trying to understand the truth of the matter. And I thought, wow, this might be something. I think I might even mention to Stephanie, who was the person that contacted me, and said, you might want to come to this hearing or this case. I said, this might be something. But you never know how a judge is going to respond because they're just asking questions. But when he read his ruling from the bench, when a judge reads a ruling from the bench, it's significant because they want you to hear exactly what they said and want you to understand it. And I thought, this is going to be great for the community or it's going to be really bad. There really is no in between. And it was really nerve-wracking because it was a big case. He's like, here we go again, it's going to be significant. And he read the facts of the case, which is just the factual information that was sitting there on the page. And then he got his opinion. And it was a scathing indictment of the police department, of being discriminatory, of doing these horrific tactics, portraying gay men as being pedophiles. And I was like, oh my God. But that was the end. He kept going and going and going. And it was like, it was amazing. It was hard to believe. And I remember turning and looking at the prosecutor's table, where the prosecutor was and one of the detectives was sitting. They were so pissed off. She put her glasses on, his arms were crossed, they were defensive, they were angry at what he was doing. And the more he read, the angrier they got. And it was phenomenal. I actually, Stephanie, you have a copy of the ruling? Okay. We're going to change gears for a second. So, Roy, you were the defendant. How did you... Sure, Jerry, do you want to give us a little bit of history, kind of condensed, of what started in 1914?
Yeah, quickly, there was reference in the film by Jules to a play called The 20th Century Way. I have to tell you that play is absolutely inaccurate in every way. What happened, which is what that was based on, was in 1914, we had a very dishonest mayor. I know that shocks you, that there would be a dishonest mayor, but he was, and he took $575 from the city of Long Beach, and he had to figure out a way to get it back. So he hired 2 special officers. And those 2 special officers were assigned to go into the one public comfort station, the one public restaurant room we had in Long Beach at the Pipe, and entrap what they call social deviants or social vagrants, which were gay men. They arrested 31 people, and Long Beach kept it really quiet because Long Beach didn't want it out that we had any kind of crime, because the mayor was actually being pushed back about burglaries and robberies and selling alcohol. Alcohol was illegal in Long Beach. And so he was being pushed back by that. They didn't want to hear this other stuff. Well, he collected $5,900 by arresting those men and finding them. And so again, the local press didn't cover it, but there was a reporter down here who used to work in Sacramento, and he knew the McClatchy, who was the publisher. And he got a hold of McClatchy, who was a homophobe. And McClatchy wanted to know what happened to a minister that had left Sacramento and came to Long Beach and started the Unitarian Church in Long Beach, because he said he was a deviant. Well, as it turns out, the guy got arrested too down here. So he kept feeding them this facts. LA police talked to this reporter and he said, do you know what's going on in Long Beach? They arrested all these guys and there's nothing locally. So he gave all the facts to McClatchy. The Sacramento Bee published an article, and the LA Times, not to be outdone, published all the names of the people who were arrested. And one of them, a very sweet man who started St. Luke's Episcopal Church, saw it and killed himself. That's when it made national news. It went, 2 people took it to trial. They both were acquitted because one was the beloved florist of the city, and everybody loved him. And the other one was a married man, and he was acquitted too. What happened as a consequence of this is that McClatchy got so pissed off that the men in Long Beach were not charged and put in prison, that he pushed the state legislature to add oral copulation to sodomy. Because up to that point, what those men did were misdemeanors, and they could pay a fine, but he wanted them to go to prison for what they were doing. The reference to the 20th century way is a reference to oral copulation. For the first time, it was starting to be very popular, and that's what that reference was at the time. I have to just tell you 2 quick things. Well, you've got to remember that the zipper was not invented until 1919. So for men to be entrapped in public restrooms, they basically had to totally disrobe. And so it was very easy to catch them because while their pants were down, you could come and arrest them. That was number two. Number two, we did not have public restrooms because the only place you could go to a public restroom was at a bar, and we didn't have bars. So they started to build public comfort stations. They were beautiful, they were marble, they were wonderful wood, and these two guys, they hired, went in and drilled holes between the partitions and enticed them in to use the boring hole. So it was a very sophisticated operation, and these guys wanted to go off and do it in other places, which they did, and then stopped doing it. The reason I brought this up is because this guy was so corrupt. He was forcing people out of office. He fired the police chief. He got rid of the city librarian because she kept a portfolio on him, clippings from newspapers from other places, and found that he'd been charged with fraud, and he wanted her out of the city, and he basically got rid of her. So when I saw that, and then I saw that he did this he hired these guys, and after it was over, the city went back to normal in the sense the issue of homosexuality did not rise again until World War II. And then the Navy, the city of Long Beach, that the citizens were molesting sailors after they came off the ship, and they wanted patrols in the city because they felt those citizens were homosexuals. It got worse in the 60s and 70s with a press telegram had reporters, and George Wilson wrote a column, I don't know if you remember, a long time ago, they called Paradise for Pansies, and he claimed that a young kid was raped in the public restroom in Belmont Shore. It was a totally made-up story. But the reason they did that was because they had to justify why they were trying to get rid of gay men out of the bathrooms. I was sharing with Rory that when I was the president of NAL, we took over the police department and said, your sex crimes unit is focusing on going after gay men, and you're doing nothing about rape and sexual assault, because they had quotas. As long as they got their arrests every month, they didn't have to do anything else. So they focused on gay men because they felt, I think they felt that they were the weaker defendants, and that they could go after them, and that there wasn't a lot of public sympathy for them. So this continued on all through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, all the way up to 2016. And I was just sharing with Rory, I was on the city council in 2014, and we never got one report from the police department about entrapment, or they would call it entrapment, but the arrest of men in restaurants. Not one, but they told the mayor. The mayor was Robert Garcia. We never once heard a complaint from him about the conduct of the police department. And so if this behavior occurs in a city, it's with the collusion of the other elected officials. And I would contend that it might be continuing today because there's really no focus on accountability and responsibility and making sure that this is not acceptable in the city of Long Beach. So this goes back to 1914, and it continued all the way through. And I was grateful for the result of the trial, because I thought that was a great way to slap Long Beach and say, you've got to stop doing this. It was the first time anyone publicly in authority said that to the city, and I thank you.
Stephanie, you had handled quite a few of these cases before Rory came to you.
So yes, I did. So what happened was, I got to start practicing law in 1990. And I volunteered at the Gay and Lesbian Center in Long Beach. And I did the legal clinic. I signed up for volunteering for the legal clinic. And probably every other person that came into the legal clinic was a gay man who had been arrested for lewd conduct. So I started finding out that this was going on in the city, and these young men were just mortified, devastated, and embarrassed that this was going on, and they didn't know what to do, and they didn't want to tell anybody. And I think that the police department counted on that because it's such a mortifying thing. The guys would find out they didn't have to go to jail. They would go to the court with a $300 fine plus penalties and assessments, which added up to about $2,000. They did a 3-year summary probation, which means stay out of trouble for 3 years and it'll never happen again. And probably a third of the gay population in Long Beach had been arrested for lewd conduct. I found out that it was happening in not just Long Beach, but most every single police units in the country. As a matter of fact, in Palm Springs, the police chief was heard to say, well, let's go back to van. It was an easy arrest because they didn't protest. They decided, wanted to, go get arrested, go in the police car and they didn't fight back. So it wasn't a difficult thing. It did keep up with the quotas. So there was an arrest. So there was a 100% crime solved. And there was pretty close to a 100% conviction rate because the guys didn't want to take it to trial. So we started a support group at the center where we had the people who had been arrested for lewd conduct come in and talk about their case. And it was amazing the people that came in to talk about their case. And as a matter of fact, the police department sent an undercover decoy into the group to tape record what was going on one night. And one of the city prosecutors who was a buddy, remember Ken Burke, called me and told me, he said, say, I just heard a recording about your lewd conduct undercover decoy came in and tape recorded it, and you need to know about that. We started fighting back. There was a man in Northern California that had been working on these cases, and we read about it in the Sacramento Bee, named Bruce Nickerson. He's just amazing. We call him the toilet lawyer. And we asked Rudy Cozio, and I asked him to come down and help with some cases. We had about maybe a dozen of them between us that we wanted to do. And then we asked for a motion to dismiss the case for discriminatory prosecution. We ran a motion to get all the arrest reports to see if this in fact was true, a Murguia type motion. And we did, floated like a lead balloon. We did finally get the reports once upon a time with J.D. Lord. He was ostracized in Long Beach with the rest of the judges because he did give us that. So no one would ever do it again. It wasn't until we got to Rory and Bruce came into the case. Rory found me, I'll tell you about that. And then I asked Bruce to come down and help out with it because it's been going on and going on. This was 25 years later, it was still going on. We did have somebody in City Hall, remember on Lowenthal? Rick Rappel was his deputy. He would come and tell me, say, we got some more lewd conduct arrests happening and things like that, in these different bathrooms. So there were music places, they called them tea rooms. So I became the tea room queen of tea room queens in Long Beach, and I most certainly would call me with these cases. And interestingly, the difference, the disconnect was the fact that the penal code description of what the lewd conduct was different than what the case law was. So the jury instruction is with the specific intent to sexually arouse, annoy, or offend. You would involve conduct touching the genitals, buttocks, or female dress in a public place or a place open or exposed to public view. And the defendant knew or should have known of the actual presence of someone who may be afflicted. Well, the bathrooms in Long Beach were built with 4-foot walls. There was one with a 5-foot wall. But the cops would go in and they would act like they would put their hands over their shirts and act like they were masturbating. They would look over the wall at the defendant. They would look around at their bendy bits. They'd give them a hairy eyeball. And then if the guys responded, they put them on and arrested for lewd conduct. And that was going on just like amazingly. And some of them were just pretending and things like that. I had some clients and things that could describe the officer's penis a lot better than the officer could describe my clients. And we know how to have fun with the cases. So my job, I felt, was to get the men to go to trial. Most of them didn't want to. And I tried to tell them, it's like, look, you put your penis into evidence and I'm sure you'll get off. Because when they did go to trial, they would win. Because jury instruction was just so specific. They finally started laughing a little bit about their situation, but most of them didn't want to go to trial anyway. It's like, well, we'll at least get a hung jury. Okay. Anyway, I think that's what finally got us to going.
Okay, so, it's kind of like, where do I begin? My name is Rory, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm a drug addict. I'm not anonymous about that, because I think if I come out with that, I'll help somebody else be clean and sober. I was 9 months clean and sober the day I got arrested. And what Jerry and Stephanie just said is, when something like that happens, it's like, oh my gosh, what do you want to do? You want to bury your head in the sand and just numb yourself. And I was working an aggressive program, and I went to my sponsor, and I had to tell my sponsor that I was arrested for indecent exposure of recon. And here I am thinking, I am going to jail. Like, I have to go to court and defend myself. And her answer to me was, believe it or not, come on, let's go. We have to go to manicures. And I'm like, I'm going to jail. You want a manicure? And it was just like, you can't worry about what's going to happen tomorrow. We have to take this one day at a time, just like your sobriety. So that was the first thing. I went to an event, and I saw a car in the parking lot, and the license plate of that car was LB Law. And I said to the person I was with, whose car is that? She said, why? And I said, it's got to be an attorney, and I need an attorney. And sure enough, it was Stephanie Lofton. I immediately went into wherever we were and introduced myself and said, I need your help. I've been arrested, blah, blah, blah. And she, we exchanged information, and she said, we'll do this. And that was the beginning. When I was arrested at Recreation Park. I knew all about cruising. I wasn't new to the experience, but that's not why I was there on this particular day. When I went into the restroom, there was nobody in that restroom. I was by myself. I actually finished what I was doing, and I went to the sink, and a really handsome, good-looking guy came walking in the door, staring at me, glaring at me, looking at me. And before I continue this, I decided to take the stand at the trial on the last day of the pre-trial. We went to lunch, Stephanie, me, Bruce Nickerson, my other attorney, and I said, I want to take the stand. And they're like, you don't have to take the stand. That's why you represent me. I said, no, the truth will set me free. And I remember sitting on that stand, scared, after 9 months of this pre-trial, going like every 6 weeks, and getting on the stand, knowing that my attorneys will ask me questions, but so will the prosecutor, and I'll be cross-examined. And answering my attorney's questions were hard enough, but when the assistant prosecutor, Anderson, started to ask me questions, I remember looking up at the judge and saying, will you let me stand up and show you what I did? And I remember standing up and saying, this is what happened. He came in, he glared at me, he looked at me, and I was crying. And my sister was in the audience, and it was hard to be honest about what had transpired. He looked at me, he was glaring at me, he was signaling me. Not a word came out of our mouths. But I knew what he was suggesting me to do. And I followed those body language, those cruising tactics, and I fell for it. And I thought, oh, this guy's flirting with me. So follow along. So I did. And I even believe I used physical gestures without taking anything out or whatever, but explaining to the judge, this is what I did, this is why I did it. Now, when I was testifying on that stand, the police officer who arrested me was sitting right in front of me. And I would not take my eyes off of him or the prosecutor while I was making my case. Now, they had already taken the stand, other police officers, including those, and they were cross-examined. And I remember at the end of the trial, at the end of the pre-trial, and the judge had made his decision, and it was like, I was leaving it up to the judge. And, you know, I gotta just be honest, I knew he was one of the first Muslim judges, and thinking, this could be about religion. I am going to be thrown off a cliff. Now, regardless of what your religion is here, I was raised a Catholic in an Italian traditional Venice family. And when my mother found out about this, she wasn't very happy. My sister wanted to throw me out. And it was like, you know what? This isn't about your morals or your values or your religion or your Bible or anything. This is about justice and the law. So when I talk to people about my story, I say, you gotta put those kind of values aside. What I did wasn't really illegal. It was wrong, you know, in so many different ways, but I was entrapped. I was taken by a decoy. After we exchanged our nonsense, like Stephanie said, he really didn't show me anything, but I showed him everything. And then when I realized, he just swung around and bumped me on his way out of the restaurant. And at first I thought, gosh, I was rejected. That was strange. And I walked out of the restroom a couple of minutes after he did. And he grabbed me and swung me to the restroom outside wall and said, Long Beach police are under arrest. And I was just shocked. I'd never been arrested, never been to jail, I was handcuffed. But he makes a signal, and 4 other undercover cops come out of cars that were parked along the street to take part in my arrest. Now, the only ones that were in the restroom were me and the undercover decoy. There was nobody else in there. So there wasn't anybody in the restroom that was offended. He encouraged me. It's just like anybody saying, oh, how can you fall for that or whatever. If there was a child right there, and we teach our kids, don't take candy from strangers. But if that stranger doesn't have to say a word, just put the candy out, guide them over. And if you haven't taught them well enough, they're going to come. So when that cop was suggesting me to walk over to that stall, I was walking over to that stall, waiting for the next step, seeing what was going to happen. And that's where the expert witness, John Duran and Jeff Paterno came in and explained what cruising was and what it was all about. Michael Petron. It was hard. It was hard to stay sober. It was hard mentally because I made a choice that I wasn't going to be one of these defendants that was just going to pay the fine and shut up and move on. That I went and I got Stephanie and I got Bruce and I said, okay, I'm ready for this, and you know, I'm going to out myself. As this is what happened. And I had people on Facebook, like from all different countries, New Zealand, Britain, just everywhere. Thank you so much for standing up for our civil rights and this and that. And yes, I did have haters, but I didn't do it just for me. Working with Stephanie and Bruce, I had to do it for the community. That, you know what, this has happened way too much, and they've gotten away with it. And after all the discovery that we did, there were hundreds of men in Long Beach that were arrested for what I did. And what bothered me even more was, if you're guilty or if you plead guilty, you're on the sex offenders registry list. You're on the ratings list. And that would have been something that would have been consensual. You were not molesting a child, raping someone. So now, I wasn't found guilty and I was dismissed. But if I was on that list, and you have kids, and I'm going to live next door, and your kid disappears, they're going to come waste their time on me. So there's so many people on that registered list that probably shouldn't be on the list, because we're not a danger to your children or to another person. But we are. A lot of people are. Not me, but there's a lot of people on Megan's Law that could be your neighbors, that could be like me. So just raise awareness. You know, I can't thank the judge enough for seeing through the case. You know, I tried really hard. I was advocating for George Moyer, who was trying to run for district attorney, because I think Doug has had his chance. He's been in that position for a long time, and like the judge said in his ruling, not only did the police officers arrest these people, but the DA's office prosecuted to the fullest extent. So when I was going to court for 9 months, there were a lot of sex trafficking was going on. There were a lot of rapes going on, but they were wasting your tax dollars on this. And it's just, it's bad.
I think it's really important to stress, and I think Halim can address this. According to the law, and this is from the California Supreme Court, not some little, opinion, anything. In their ruling regarding lewd conduct, they said that one of the parties must be offended for the state to have any interest in prosecuting these cases. So when Rory describes, and when Stephanie has described these police tactics, where the police know exactly what to do of how to ensnare these gay men. They know the cruising culture. They know what to do. The winks, the flirting. I mean, let's be real. When guys go into a bathroom, eyes forward, doing your business, you're out. You're making no contact with anybody. You're not even, if your long-lost brother from 30 years is standing there, you're not even going to acknowledge him. You're in, you're out. So, these guys are winking, and they know exactly what they're doing. And so then to claim that they're offended when someone responds to their actions, you address this in it's just preposterous and just false. And so all of these arrests are essentially based upon a lie, and it goes against what the law says, what is defined as lewd. Talk a little bit about the ruling just in terms of, and this is going on, this stuff, I think for decades, this was the police template. And for decades, they got away with this. Innocent men being targeted, gay men being targeted. The police knew exactly what they were doing. The prosecutor knew exactly what he was doing. When I wrote my first story about this particular case, I never forget when I called Doug Halbert for a quote, he said to me, "Oh, this is a garden variety lewd conduct case." So he knew exactly what this was. He's seen the police reports, he knew the tactics, and he thought, we're just going to get away with it all over again. But they didn't. Okay, the floor is yours.
Yeah, to be completely honest with you, the justice system sometimes can be like a machine. And it just operates on its own momentum, to the point where we don't always, those of us who work in the justice system day in and day out, don't always understand how people can be sort of wound up in that machine. And not really because it's a just result, but because it's the expected result. And it's kind of going on what you were just saying, Phil. You know, when I walked into my courtroom that day, and I saw my calendar, it's a misdemeanor calendar in Long Beach, there's a lot of cases, a lot of different types of cases on there. And I got to a lewd conduct case, I expected, you know, a garden variety lewd conduct case, which is people come in, they plead guilty, they get placed on probation, and we move on. And as a judge, you know, I'm going to confess, that's kind of what you want to happen, because you want to move the stuff along. And when I saw that, I got that file, that lewd conduct file from my clerk, and it wasn't this thick, it was this thick, because it had a motion from some really good attorneys in there. All of a sudden, all I could think about was, come on, like, what are we doing? Like, can we just, let's get through this. And I remember Bruce and Stephanie basically said, no, we're not here to plead guilty. We have a motion, we want you to read it, we want you to consider it. We want to get discovery from the city to see whether there's a discriminatory prosecution going on here. And I, of course, did what a lot of good judges do at that point. I continued the case. Because I can't read all this stuff right now. So I punted it. I told the prosecutor, I want you to take a look at this and give me your response. I'm going to look at it. And when we came back into court, the one thing that kept coming back to me was, I have a lot of discretion here. I can tell them, you know what, your discovery request is overbroad. They were asking for all of the complaints in the last 5 years from the Long Beach Police Department of any lewd conduct case involving gay men, involving straight people, in all locations. And there's a lot of records there. That's a lot of information. And I had discretion to do what most judges in the state had been doing up to that point, which is to say, no, you don't get that. We'll just do your motion without all that discovery. And then it occurred to me, and I asked the prosecutor, this is a constitutional claim that the defense is making. How are they able to make this claim unless they get this discovery to look at it? It's impossible to make that claim, right? And the prosecutor agreed. There's no other way to do it unless I granted the motion, so I granted it. And that just kind of got the ball rolling. A several-month process of coming back in and trying to get ready for this really long evidentiary hearing that we did. And as a judge, that's when things really started to turn for me. And I started to think, you know what? Maybe this is not a garden variety case after all, but this is what I signed up for, and so this is what I'm supposed to do, and actually evaluate the claims that are being made. And when the officers testified and the evidence started to become clearer to me, it was, frankly, as a judge, offensive. When we talk about, someone being offended in a lewd conduct case, I was the person who was offended. I was offended by the conduct of the police department, because what I learned, and what they didn't even really try to hide, was they were trained to target gay men. They were trained to write in their reports, in all of their reports, Recreation Park, or whatever the location was, is within 100 yards of a school, Wilson High School. Didn't matter if it wasn't during school hours, didn't matter if it wasn't a school day. They were trained to put that in there. And I remember asking the officers, why do you put that in there if it's not a school day? Well, that's what we're trained to do that. And I think everyone in this room can answer that question. Why are we talking about school when there's no children around? Because they want me thinking that there's children around. There was nobody around. They were trained to do other things that I thought were pretty ridiculous, that Rory was just talking about, where they go in and they linger, right? It's part of the cruising evidence that came in. They linger, they make eye contact, they kind of give a little head nod, a little what's up, a little nonverbal communication back and forth. And it was kind of, it was funny to me. Usually when you have an expert witness testify, the expert is there to tell you about things that aren't common sense to you. That's the whole reason why they're allowed to testify. And if you weren't involved or didn't know a lot about cruising culture, you would need an expert to explain sort of how that interaction works. And so I was grateful for that evidence. Then the prosecutor tried to convince me of what normally happens in a men's restroom. And I thought, okay, well, here's an area where I have some expertise. I don't need an expert to say what Phil just said, which is when men go in a public restroom, They have no interaction with anybody. I could go in there with my son, and I won't speak to him. I won't look at him. We're doing our thing, and we're out. That's just what we do. We'll have a conversation later, but it's not going to happen there in the bathroom. And the interaction that the police would engage in was something that they were trained to do. I asked them, and they testified. This is what we were trained to do. Make eye contact, smile, linger around and not actually use the facilities, right? These are all signals to somebody that whatever interaction is about to happen is consensual. And that was really at the heart of what was going on here. They were trying to get individuals to feel comfortable, to let their guard down, so that they could get them to commit a crime. They're encouraging the commission of the crime. The other thing that was really, really offensive to me, and this is, judges, they have their own perspectives and their own views on life and their own backgrounds, but the one thing all judges can agree on is they are not fond of being lied to. And what happened in that hearing was the position of the prosecutor and the police, in every report, they were trained to write, we were here at this location because we received citizen complaints of lewd conduct. And in the past 5 years, at Recreation Park, you want to know how many complaints of lewd conduct they had? 0. Not one. But they put it on all the reports. Every single one. I asked them why, they said, well, that's what we were trained to do. So at that point, it started to really crystallize in my mind, okay, this is a scam. This is a scam that's being perpetrated not just on the gay community, but on the court, on the justice system. And judges up to this point had been endorsing it because they just wanted to treat it like a garden variety case because that's the easier thing to do. But it was a systematic, intentional attempt to basically strip people of their constitutional rights. And I don't care how you came to the bench or what kind of judge you are, that is the kind of thing that should make your skin crawl. It should make you really, really upset. And that was, at the end of the day, how I saw the case. It's not, it didn't involve any real complex legal question. It was pretty obvious at that point. And so, honestly, the decision that I came up to, the opinion that I wrote, was not my own. It was compelled by the Constitution, and I just put it on paper.
When I interviewed you a couple of years ago after you had retired as a judge, and I brought up this case, immediately you knew what it was. I think a second. So this case had a huge impact on you. You've heard hundreds, maybe thousands of cases. What made this one stand out so much? And you just rattled off stuff about the evidence just off the top of your head. This had a huge impact on you. Why was that? What made this, I don't know, words your mouth, but what made this so egregious to you? Because you tried death penalty cases a lot. I didn't say tried, heard death penalty. Why? What was it about this?
It's really just the last thing I just said. You don't really have a lot of occasions as a judge to have a case in your courtroom that implicates constitutional rights in this way. And you certainly rarely, if ever, get a case where it becomes very clear to you that the mechanisms of the law are operating in this way to disempower and to abuse a discrete minority. If you know what happens, you read about it in law school, and it's conceptually, you understand that it's a thing that can happen. Maybe nowadays we're seeing it even more on a regular basis on our news feeds. But that's not something that the average everyday judge ever has to confront. And so when that comes in front of you, it becomes a big deal for you professionally and personally. Also because you can imagine, this particular year was an election year. I was up for re-election, and I, in my mind, was thinking, okay, what is this going to look like? There's media attention, and is there going to be any blowback on me? There was all of these things swirling around in my head. But what it kept coming back down to was, I chose this position as a judge on purpose. No one forced me to do it. And I once had a colleague tell me that, when it comes to being a judge, in order to do the job right, you have to be willing to lose it. And that's that was my attitude. Like, this is why I'm here. There's really only one thing I can do, which is follow the law, follow the Constitution, and let the chips fall where they may. Because even as consequential as it was for me, in my mind, I couldn't get out of my head how consequential it was for the individual who was charged. All of the people in the discovery that I saw were being targeted really for no reason. Among the things that we found out in discovery was there's a lot of lewd conduct complaints in the city of Long Beach, most of which about heterosexual conduct at different locations. Anyone want to guess how many stings have been run in the last 5 years prior to this for heterosexual conduct? Zero. Not one. So at that point it becomes easy, right? There's no explanation for why, if you're going to base it on citizen complaints, why you're targeting one portion of the community. And this idea of sex registration this is not a small matter. We've heard about how it can lead people to substance abuse, to suicide. It's just devastating. And that is the goal, or at least back then, that was the goal of these investigations. What they would do is they would sort of encourage the conduct to increase beyond a certain point, where at first the interaction you get to a misdemeanor level of conduct, which is not a registrable offense, but it's a crime. And if the police believed that was a crime, the appropriate thing to do would be to arrest that person for that non-registrable offense. But they never do it, because their training was, as they testified, their training was, well, we wanted to continue to see if the conduct could become more severe so that it would be a registrable offense. They did it on purpose. And that's when I talk in my ruling about animus towards the gay community, that's what I'm talking about. They're not there to enforce the law. They are there to try to get the most severe result against a particular community. And where else in the law does this happen? Can you imagine the police, seeing someone in a fist fight and then thinking, oh, well, that's a misdemeanor assault, but if I just wait, maybe it'll become a murder, and I'm just going to hang back and see what happens, right? They don't do that. They're not supposed to do that. We don't want them to. But in this scenario, that's what they were trained to do, because they wanted to get that result, which is so devastating. And that's why it was easy for me, even though it was so many years ago, it was easy for me to recall exactly what happened.
When you wrote your opinion and you outlined in meticulous detail all these things that you just said, they had these fake boilerplates with false information, making the allusions to the school to present gay men as being, pedophiles or perverts. I mean, when you heard all of the evidence, did you know, or do you have an idea of how you were going to structure your opinion? Or I think in the ruling, the opinion said it was like 14 days. Or did you kind of muster, and the longer you looked at it, the madder you got, like, no, this is going to be good. I mean, how did you structure and organize? And you decided to read it also. I mean, were you trying to send a message? Were you just like, enough is enough of this shit? Sorry, I swear.
And I don't want to suck all the oxygen out of the room from the other panelists, but I will say this. When you are a judge, by the way, I'm not on the bench anymore, I'm retired from the court, and one of the best things about that is I have no constraints about what I say publicly. So you're getting an unfiltered version from me right now, which I never could have done when I was a judge. And the reason why I bring that up is because if you are a judge and you make a ruling in your courtroom, you may not publicly talk about that ruling at any point. And so if the press misrepresents what your ruling was, what you said, what it meant, what the evidence was, you can't then say, you know what, hold on a second, that's not how this went down. And so that was my choice, to actually write out the ruling and make sure that when I read it from the bench, it was clear that the public had the entire story, and they knew exactly what I was thinking and why I made the decision I did. So that was one big reason why I structured it that way. Another reason was, I expected my ruling to be appealed. I thought for sure this practice has been going on for 100 years. If the city's going to think I'm wrong, they're going to appeal me. They never appealed me because I think they accepted that they were wrong. But knowing or expecting something like a challenge to happen on review, I wanted my ruling to be very, very thorough and written away so that the Court of Appeal, if they wanted to look at it, they could see exactly why I did what I did. I was very confident in my analysis. And so that's the reason why it was so detailed and why I read it from the bench publicly.
I was going to ask you a Stephanie question, but go ahead.
Well, I just want, what police practices were in the olden days, when they entrapped a man in a bathroom, they would take an indelible ink pen and mark his penis, so that when they drug him off to the jail judge, they would pull the pants down and say, he's guilty. And the judge then would fine them, and again, the fine was about $300 to $500, which was a lot of money at that time, or they could get 6 months in jail. The man that wound up committing suicide argued that he was a pharmacist, and argued that he had taken some medication, which is what made his penis go blue. He never got to testify in court about that, and I think he understood he was so overwhelmed by what was going on and how it was going to ruin his life, that this made reasons he took his life. But it was very clear the police department and the judicial system in the city was set up to prosecute these men and to make sure that they paid a fine or they were put in jail. It wasn't a matter of, that they were going to have a fair trial. The two people that did win, I might mention, one had the blue marking, the other did not. He was actually entrapped by these two guys who pretended to be his lover and came into his apartment. And one of the cops fell off the roof while they were looking through a hole in the roof, and it alerted everybody, so it kind of ruined what was going on at the time. But he never had to testify about the markings, but all the other men had to live with that.
I just wonder, for Stephanie and for Jerry, in the video, Jules mentioned that Long Beach has a reputation of being gay-friendly. So how does this conduct from the police department, how does it allow, this didn't happen in a vacuum, how is it allowed to happen in the city for over 100 years? How does a gay-friendly city allow that to happen? And by the way, this wasn't a secret. I remember when I first moved to Long Beach and I went to a couple of town hall meetings involving the police and the gay community, Stephanie Laughlin was always there. And she always asked the police, when are you going to stop your lewd conduct, these undercover sting operations? And I first thought, what the hell is this about? And I went to the third or fourth meeting she was at, I heard her bring this up. I approached her like, what are you talking about? What is this stuff? And so she was always talking to anybody who would listen, always. And so this didn't happen in a vacuum. I mean, she got my attention and I wrote these stories and here we are today. But how did this continue for 100 years? More than 100 years?
Well, what happened was the guys wouldn't talk about it, and so it was a secret. I was the one that sort of blurted it out, and hey, what's happening to all my guys, okay? They told me about it, and I'm a blackmouth, so I'm telling y'all, look what's happening to the gay population. The cops are arresting them. They're going after them. This is a gay-friendly city, so they've got a great big pool, and nobody's talking about it. Hello? They did it for a long time. I was involved with the Gay and Lesbian Police Chiefs Advisory Group. I went to the trainings and I talked to them about this, and I said, say, all of these arrests that you're making are actually false arrests because you cannot arrest somebody that you are the only person in there. You get them in the very eyeball, and then say, oh, and then you show you his penis and go, oh, I'm so offended by that penis, I'm going to arrest you now. Okay? You can't do that. And here's Pryor versus Superior Court that says that. That's since 1979 or 78, I can't remember. But you can't do that. He's like, oh, but here's the penal code. Yes, we can, and they continued on. So that was the problem. The guys wouldn't talk about it.
Well, I think from a political standpoint, I was amazed, and I put it in the book too, we got the 100% rating from HRC while this was all going on, that we were the, premier gay city. I do think there is a split in people's minds sometimes. They don't understand that what occurred in the restrooms was not necessarily bad conduct. or that it was provoked by the police. They hear the police are trying to keep these men out of the bathrooms because these are public parks. You know, I represented the 5th, and we have the most parks in the city of Long Beach, and Hartwell Park is a big favor of the police and Les Robbins when he was the councilman and the sheriff. And he was that set on, you know, there's a terrible thing happening in the park, you know, there's all these homosexuals going in there and doing these things. I truly don't think they knew what was occurring. And so I think there was the support of the gay community, but it was the support of law-abiding gay community. And that they differentiated, I think in their minds, that men who were arrested for this were not really part of the gay community that were out there celebrating. And I think it's a matter of education. People need to know what their police department is doing or not doing. It's not just on this, it's on a lot of things. People just don't have that understanding. So the sense is they want to support the police. And they have to have a lot of evidence to go to the contrary and say, wait a minute, you guys, you're doing what you're doing.
So it sounds like that the police department did a good job of publicizing a false narrative. They did a great job of painting this as being, you know, they were doing their job, when in fact it really wasn't, right? That's what something you're saying?
I do think so. I think the reporting on it was always one way. You know, it sounded like the police were going in and they were cleaning up the public restrooms, and, you know, families didn't have, because you get one or two narratives from a mother who said, I can't take my kids in those restrooms anymore because I know what goes on in there. And I wanted to say not in the women's restrooms, but, you know, she just had this sense, and they could say that in the paper. And we didn't get, I have to say, we didn't get the contrary argument. It was never presented. Nobody ever came in front of council. I was there and said, hey, you know what your department's doing, and you know that this is wrong, and they're entrapping people.
I remember, this was a couple of years, I think, before the Rory's case, I had one of the public information officers from the Long Beach Police Department contact me just before Gay Pride, I think a month or two before, wanting to do a story about these restrooms where they were doing this cruising at. And I was already, I'd been talking with Stephanie, so and I said, oh, well, can you send me like the police reports and the complaints? Because I knew what they were trying to do and I didn't fall for it. And the voice in the line got kind of quiet, and I was like, just, you know, the reports and the complaints you send them to me? Oh yeah, sure, okay. Like a week went by and I followed up, like, hey, you have that information? Oh, you know, we're still gathering, we'll get back to you. In the meantime, they went to another reporter, who was the cops and courts reporter at the time, who kind of was more like a PR person for the cops. And she just regurgitated everything that the cops said. Didn't challenge anything, didn't question anything, didn't put in about the California Supreme Court ruling. It just was, and so what they did, they didn't want anybody to challenge them. And I was like, well, give me this information. They wanted somebody to stick a rubber stamp. And when that story ran, I remember going to her and I was like, did you happen to call this attorney? Did you know this? And she kind of flippantly was like, well, you know, whatever, like maybe I get another story. So I'm like, yeah, here's the problem. You're just kind of repeating their message, and you're just regurgitating it ad nauseum, not really questioning. Because there's this perception, you know, dirty gay men in the bathroom. That's not what was happening. Do we have any questions?
Hi, first thank you everyone for everything that you've done. It's tremendously commendable for Long Beach. I just a question in regards to, you had said that you had brought it, these had been brought up to Mayor Garcia when he was mayor about the actions that were happening, and that nothing happened, there was no complaints. Is that not, did I misunderstand that?
We were never informed that the police activity, about the police activity in the restrooms or the arrest of gay men. That's not something they ever reported to us,
Right.
the city council.
Right, but you had said that that had gone to the
Yes,
mayor.
but
Do you know that the mayor had been received those, or no? Is anybody questioning on that?
Yes, it's usually the procedure is things get reported to the mayor that don't get reported to the city council.
But is there any way of asking Congressman
I don't know.
Garcia?
I can't prove it, but the thing is, when I went through.
I just want to make, like, I mean, it was,
Yeah.
it caused a little bit of confusion. I called, has anybody talked to him about it and asked him, has he ever had it, and what did he do with the information, that's all. If it happened, because it doesn't come to city councils, but it did come to previous mayors, So that did come to previous mayors, maybe the practice of them going to the current mayor would have happened. I don't know. Just a question.
It's interesting that since the ruling, the police chief at the time was Robert Luna, who is now the LA County Sheriff. At a couple of different press conferences, I asked him, hey, there was this huge significant ruling. Is the police department going to apologize to the gay community for what you guys did for all these years? He got angry at me and wouldn't answer the question. I've since gone to the current Long Beach police chief, Wally Hebish. I was talking to him at a town hall meeting and asked him if he would apologize to the community. He got very defensive with me and angry and walked away and said, I'm not going to talk to you. So we still, almost 10 years later, next year is the 10th anniversary of the ruling, we still don't have city officials taking any accountability for what happened. Any other questions?
My question is kind of related in that, for you, Judge, having been a former prosecutor, how did it feel to get this kind of information before you, that this evidence that you relied on for so long were also behaving in this way? And then how did that kind of affect the remainder of your practice?
This is on. Okay, good. That's a really good question because for me, I was a prosecutor for 14 years before I became a judge. And when you're the prosecutor, the police are your pretty standard staple witnesses on every case. And you don't go in with a police report thinking, okay, how is this person lying to me right now? You almost take it for granted. And so for me, it was very disorienting, frankly, to have these officers come in and testify and with very little scrutiny at all, make it clear that they were lying in their reports. And that did affect me as a judge and how I would approach my cases going forward. For my time on the Court of Appeal, I think it gave me a little bit more skepticism that you can't just take people's words for granted. And I think I realized that the judicial role has to be, if it's going to be meaningful at all, it has to be more than just rubber stamping what comes before you. Otherwise, the whole thing becomes illegitimate. So I would say that this case was an education for me.
Why wasn't there a civil rights action against the city of Long Beach? There was. How'd that go?
There was a settlement, there was a lawsuit against the city, and the city did settle.
Thank you. First, I want to congratulate everyone on the panel. What an amazing and unique presentation on just such a really important landmark legal case. But in my question, I want to broaden the scope here, given the time we sit in here today, because two things stand out about what happened on that day. One is abuse of power by the police, right, at a time that maybe we all took for granted, many people, I would say, I'll be one, that so much of that can go on. But secondarily, the judge, a judge who stood up for the Constitution, he made that very clear both then and now. And I appreciate your candor. We're in a time when judges are threatened and where many judges, all the way up to the Supreme Court, are kind of setting aside the Constitution. I'm not an attorney, and I'm certainly not a constitutional law scholar. I am an activist. I'm part of 5051. I have been very activated by what's going on. And one of the key things that comes up going back to Judge Marchand and how he handled the ruling in terms of Trump and his 34 felonies. And you sit and you wonder, I would say, I'm not a scholar. There's this blatancy of disregard for the Constitution by the very people who are supposed to be defending it. And I'm so appreciative now. I would have taken so much more for granted what happened, Judge, former judge, what you did. I want the panel to comment on what happened in the broader context of what's happening today, because I think that's an inescapable thing to talk about. Thank you.
Yeah, That's a great question, and I can get the ball rolling here. As someone who, I dedicated my whole professional life to the justice system, as a lawyer and as a judge of appellate justice, it has been really sad to see what's going on today. And the sadness for me comes from not this idea that some judges and people in position of power are using the law in a way that is counter to what our constitutional principles are. It's the realization that maybe it's always been this way. I think the law and the Constitution look really great on paper, but the way over the course of American history is concerned, you can ask people from certain communities and ask them, hey, do you think that the law is operating in an unfair way now more than before? And they'll say, no, this is the reality. This is what I know. And I look at the law a little bit differently now. The law is a vehicle for power. That's really all it's ever been. Now, it can be used in a way that protects the rights of everyone, but it can also be used as a way to oppress people and to give legitimacy to a system that disenfranchises the powerless. And perhaps that's the way it's always been, right? It's ask someone from the Native American community. Maybe this is what the Constitution has always been. And for me, it's really, really sad to see, to come to that realization that it's almost like the law is like fire, right? Fire can be a good thing. It can keep you warm, it can cook your food, it can enable you to do things that you can't do without it. It can also burn your house down, and it can cause a tremendous amount of pain. So it really has more to do with who's wielding that power than the institution itself. People ask me all the time right now, this is what's going to be in from the Supreme Court, is this constitutional? And my answer used to be, well, the Constitution says X, Y, and Z. And now my answer is, well, are there 5 people on the Supreme Court that would agree with that? Because that's what the Constitution is. And so it's, to me, to answer your question, in the context of what's going on, what's old is new again. And we see institutions using the color of law to oppress people in ways that perhaps they always have. And it's up to individuals who participate in the system to try to find a way to push back against that.
What he said. Criminal defense attorneys, we've always said there's no justice, just us. Right? So, the president, the office of the president, one of the most important things they do are appoint judges. And that's one of the really big reasons why we need to look at who we're choosing as a prosecutor.
To answer your question from before a little bit more straightforward, Stephanie and Bruce were my criminal defense attorneys. I had other attorneys based out of Manhattan Beach that represented me on a civil trial. We met with the arbitrators and mediators, and we knew just from the judge's ruling that in his opinion, he said that the police department was discriminatory and that the prosecutor, supported that. So we didn't even get it to trial. We were able to settle out, and I wanted to give us.
Is there a mic? Do you think it would have had a bigger impact by going to trial instead of settling?
Yeah, I do. I had really good attorneys, but when you're doing that, it's like this was hard enough on a mental capacity, and it was like, how much longer? How much more can I do? How much more can I take? Do I just take this and move on? And I think for my own self, that was the right thing to do.
I told him it's better to have a good life than a good lawsuit.
But, to move on with what Alex had talked about and asked, I always ask Philip when we are in contact, so are they still doing this? And the answer is, well, they say they're not. Do we believe them? I mean, she hasn't had any cases, but does that that mean they're not doing it? So I think where I'm taking it is I've lost a lot of trust in my police department. I would call them to protect me or to help somebody or whatever, and now it's like I second guess the people that are supposed to protect me. I was a big advocate for Pride, and I was the Grand Marshal. But I went to every Pride parade in New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Long Beach, and I started to question why would we allow the police department to march in our parade? And it got really debatable. And I actually fell back onto the side of they need to be our friends. We need to teach them that we are not deviants, that we are not just bad people, you know. So, yeah, not every cop is a bad cop.
On the police marching, I had that problem when I was doing the gay history book about including pictures of police marching in the Pride Parade. I will tell you that most of the police officers that are there now are gay that march in the parade. And it was their way to be able to come out, and because they couldn't do that before. And you get the like a chief did or something, but most of those officers that are there are gay. One of the things I want to say about your point, it's so well taken, and thank you for doing 50-51. You're doing incredible work in getting the word out. I'm an attorney, and I've often thought that this country is based on the concept of consent. We consent to be governed. We consent to be governed because we think the people who govern us are going to do the right things. We are ill prepared in a society where those that govern us have decided not to follow the law. And I think that's, many of us are struggling with that, about what do we do when all the systems seem to be collapsing, the judicial system, especially the Supreme Court, the police, some of the places with the elected officials. And it's like, we're not used to this in this country. And I think our goal, we have to educate and prepare people about what the system is and where it's failing and what do we need to do to repair it. Because without that, I think it's going to continue to get worse because a lot of people feel, I don't even know what they're talking about on MSNBC. We've got to stand up and understand that we don't have those guardrails. The Constitution, I always thought, was our guardrail, but it ain't if you don't have people agreeing with it and understanding it and supporting it. One last thing to tell you, yesterday, the city of Long Beach is going to have to pay you all $60 million because it illegally raised the sales tax, okay? Because the city attorney said, you can do it. And the court went, no, you can't. You can't. And so you get $60 million. 3 years ago, I sued and we got $30 million on your utility rates. They can't put surcharges on water rates and things like that. So let's not assume they know what they're doing. From the issues of gay men in restrooms and the police conduct to a lot of things. Please do not assume elected officials know what they're doing. Hold them accountable. That's the only way this is going to work.
I just have one more thing before you ask the question. You know, as a defendant, I left you leave a lot up to your attorneys. And when they were asking for motions, I was confused, what are you asking for that for? You know, we're just lay people leaving it to them to save our asses. And when I went into court every day, I was afraid. And I was silent, and I kept, to myself, and I listened to them. But now, after hearing what the judge thought every day, that these guys were, he was offended, and I was scared every day, I would have felt a lot better if I knew what you were thinking.
Good for you.
Any other questions for our fabulous panel? lot of good stuff here today.
Phil, if I could just mention that my book is back here for sale. So if you'd like to buy it before you go, please do.
Okay, so if you want to support, you want to keep up with all of the news we cover at Q Voice News, other events we're going to have, perhaps more stories about new conduct happening, please subscribe to our newsletter. You can scan this QR code. If you would like to support Q Voice News, our coverage is free to read and watch. It's not free to produce. You can scan this QR code to donate. Thanks everyone for attending. We appreciate it. We hope you learned some stuff today. And thanks again to our fabulous and informed panel. We appreciate you.